What war were you in, and what branch of the service did you serve in?
I was inducted or enlisted into originally the National Guard, and that was activated into the Army.
And this was in World War II?
World War II. Prior to World War II.
And what was your highest rank?
First Lieutenant.
Louis, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted in the National Guard.
Do you remember the year?
Let me explain first that I believe it was September 1940 that there was a draft, and that the lottery was a national lottery in Washington, D.C., and I received what they would have considered a low number because that's the way it was set up. And when I got my number in the lottery, I knew that I was going to be called into the service rather early. And so, after consultation with my father, we decided to join the National Guard, which was also having a year of service, and that I would join the National Guard, do my service, and that would be it. And go with the local National Guard, and I know the people locally. So that's what I did, and for the first couple of months, I used to attend the weekly drills at the local armory. And lo and behold, the National Guard was federalized, and I, being a part of the 169th Infantry, which was a part of the 43rd Division, was ordered to active duty with the Army. And immediately I had to put on my uniform, and before leaving New Britain, I used to report at the local armory and drill all day, and then allow to go home at night. And we did that until early March, when we entrained for Camp Blanding, Florida.
Now, where were you living at the time that you enlisted in the National Guard?
In New Britain.
New Britain, Connecticut?
Right.
Are you a New Britain native?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember the date, or at least the year that the National Guard was federalized and you got your orders to active duty?
I just mentioned it. I had already mentioned it to you.
What was that year? Well, I know you joined the National Guard in 1940.
1941, I believe it was January or February that the Guard was federalized.
And you were, had you done any basic training?
Yes, ma'am. We used to go every morning down to Willowbrook Park in New Britain, and we used to do a lot of close order drill and very minute, I might say, maneuvers that the park was able to accommodate. And we did that most of the day, and then marched back up to the armory, and we were dismissed for the day and to our homes, and we would report back the next morning again to the armory to start the next day's activity.
Now, you said you were sent to Camp, what was that?
Blanding. Camp Blanding, Florida.
B-L-A-N-D-I-N-G?
Right. In fact, the whole 43rd Division went there.
And what did you do there?
Well, there we started, after that, we were at that time part of the Army, we started out basic training. We went through a series of basic training, which was early in 41, and then we were sent to Louisiana for maneuvers.
How long were you in basic training at Camp Landing?
Well, I would say about 3 months basic training, and there we went to Louisiana for maneuvers, which extended for 3 months, the maneuvers.
Wow.
We went to what was called the Kisatchie National Forest, and our base was called Dry Prong, Louisiana. And there we became part of the Third Army. And
basic training must have been pretty easy for you after you'd already done a lot of that up here in New Britain.
well,
Was it different?
it was more intensive.
If you went with your whole division, you must have gone down with a lot of guys you knew from your hometown.
Mostly until the draftees. We were not a full company at the time. I was part of I Company of the 169th Infantry Regiment, and we were filled in by draftees, mostly Southerners, and filled in the ranks until we had a full complement.
What was your experience like with your maneuvers in Louisiana? When you had 3 months of maneuvers, what kinds of things did you do?
We did a lot of hiking in swamp-like territory. It was not exactly easy because we were on the go all the time. We even traveled as part of the maneuvers many miles per day, and sometimes because of the time of the year down in Florida, we became very thirsty, and we sometimes drank local water, which we probably shouldn't have, but because of necessity we did.
Did you get sick at all from?
No, we did not get sick, thankfully.
Where did you go from Louisiana?
From Louisiana, by that time it got to be towards September of 1941, and they sent us to the Carolinas for further maneuvers. And we maneuvered between North Carolina and South Carolina, up and down both states. And finally, by the end of November, we had completed the maneuvers, and we went back to Camp Landing, Florida. It wasn't hardly a week after we'd gotten back that the war was declared on December 7th.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that war was declared?
I heard it. I was flat on my back doing what they call bunk fatigue, which was on a Sunday, as I recall. You know, after our extended maneuvers, we were a little bit tired, and we thought we'd catch up on a little of what we called, as I just said, bunk fatigue.
So you were in your bed taking a nap?
Right.
You remember your reaction when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
Well, it was hard to believe, but we accepted it. And some of my buddies really took it very hard. And they really felt very badly about it. But I took it rather philosophically, and reading the papers of what was going on in Europe and so forth, that it looked like to me that war would be inevitable. And so I just tried to make the best of it.
And where did you go from there?
From there, after a while, the higher command decided that they would move the entire division from Camp Landing to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And so, by convoy, with all the equipment that we had and all the baggage and personnel, we drove from Camp Landing across the state, the panhandle of Florida, through Alabama and came to Camp Shelby, Mississippi.
Did you have a specific job assignment?
Yes.
What was it?
I started out originally as a private with the rifle company, but they asked me to join the weapons platoon of the company, and I became a gunner for the 60-millimeter mortar.
Where did you do your training for that?
At Camp Shelby. We did not have any equipment. We used sticks for mortars because we did not have the actual weapon. And so I did become a corporal there, and I commanded, or so-called commanded, the squad, the mortar squad.
Can you tell me about the mortar guns?
Well, the mortar,
Or what do you call them? Weapons?
is a real weapon. It fires a 60-millimeter shell, and it's just a tube. And you drop the shell, it is a shell, down the tube, and it's fired upon contact, and it's used mostly for short-range targets to accompany the infantry. And it had what they called a sight that you used to that was attached to the mortar to find targets and estimate the range. And using that sight, we estimated the range and fired the weapon.
And how many men did it take to operate that?
It actually only took 2 men. Actually, you could have a third that would handle ammunition, but the 2 men would be only necessary. One person carried the tube, the other person carried the so-called base plate, as it was called, and that's all it took to carry.
Which did you carry, or you alternated?
Well, I was being a corporal. I didn't have to carry anything.
Oh, that was nice.
I only carried my own weapon, personal weapon, and I had 2 men carry the weapon and the base plate.
So you would oversee them setting it up if you were going to actually use it?
Absolutely. That's exactly what my duty was, to use the sight to estimate the range.
So that was part of your job, to sight it in?
Sight it in, and the gunner would adjust the weapon for the range, and then the other person would handle the ammunition, that is the shells for the tube.
So was most of your training at Camp Shelby in the use of the mortar?
Yes.
And then where did you go from there?
Well, from there, after finding a notice in the company headquarters that they were looking for possible candidates, for officer candidates, I decided that I was going to apply to officer candidate school. And I did apply to the quartermaster corps for a commission.
Why did you choose the quartermaster corps?
Well, because of my civilian experience.
Which was
I was in the wholesale grocery business, and I knew the distribution of food, and that was a part of one of the functions of the quartermaster corps. I appeared before a quartermaster board, a division board of at least a half a dozen officers, and it took. First time, I did not pass the board. They asked me questions that I couldn't answer, and I said I don't know, because I was in the infantry, not the quartermaster corps. But I applied a second time at a future occasion, and I was accepted. And I went to officer candidate school in September of '42.
And was that still at Camp Shelby, or was it?
No, I was sent for quartermaster officer training at Camp Lee, Virginia.
How long did that training last?
I was what they called a 90-day wonder.
Oh, I've heard about those guys. What was the training like?
Well, it was a mixture of military training and quartermaster tactics. That is supply training and also military training. And while I was there, inasmuch as I had infantry training, most of them had been in the quartermaster corps, the other cadets, as we were called. I was asked to be in charge of bayonet training for the cadet class.
Did you know anything about using the bayonet?
I learned the bayonet when I was in the infantry, and I knew how to use it. And I told them, we trained the military training, and I showed them the use of the bayonet. And I later became an adjutant to the commander of the cadet corps, and I helped the commander. I was ordered to. I was ordered by the commander to assemble the cadet corps and turn it over to the commander of the cadet corps. That was my job as adjutant.
Wow. And this was all in your 90-day stay there?
Exactly.
So you didn't even use your mortar training for anything?
No.
After your 90 days, where did you go?
After my 90 days, I got my commission.
What's that mean?
Well, they had a ceremony where it was like a graduation exercise, where you were handed your commission, and you could wear your gold bars as a brand new second lieutenant. And I was ordered to a 10-day delay en route to Camp Devens, Massachusetts, where I had a baker's and cook's course, and where I did mess management. And in the meantime, I got married.
Busy. In between
the 10-day
wonders at
right,
Camp Devens?
right.
Did you come home to New Britain to get married?
Yes, I did.
On your 10 days?
Yeah, on my 10 days, right. I was married in New Britain.
What was the date?
November the 15th of '42.
When you went on to Camp Devens, Massachusetts.
Yeah, 30-day course.
It was a 30-day course in baking and cooking,
Right, mess management.
so you learned to,
How to handle, how the company, they called it, the meals, they called it a mess. The company mess. That's all. But that was not very difficult. That was very easy.
in all of your training prior to this and up at Camp Devens, do you remember any of your instructors?
Not really. No, they were not. There weren't any that are outstanding that I could remember.
Now, by the time you're at Camp Devens, you probably are not with a lot of your hometown buddies anymore.
No more. I was strictly on my own.
Where did you go after your 30 days at Camp
Back
Devens?
to Camp Lee, what they called a replacement depot. In other words, a pool. And awaiting orders to be assigned to some unit. And I did become assigned to a
How long
unit.
did you wait?
Oh, perhaps 30 days.
And what unit did they assign you to?
They assigned me to a unit in Camp Atterbury, Indiana. The 249th Quartermaster Battalion.
That was Camp Atterbury?
Atterbury.
Atterbury?
Atterbury. Camp Atterbury, Indiana. And that's where I was assigned. It was a black outfit, all black.
Did you know that when they assigned it to you?
No, I did not know it till I arrived there.
What was your reaction?
Well, my attitude always was to accept whatever came my way, whatever it happened to be. Black or white, it made no difference to me.
So you were then to become the officer of this battalion?
I was one of the officers because I was only a shave-tail second lieutenant. I did not command the company.
Oh. So how big of a group of men were you in charge of?
Well, I was in charge of a platoon.
How many men in a platoon?
Oh, the platoon was probably 50 or 75 men.
So what did you do while you were at Camp Atterbury?
Basic training, infantry basic training, which was familiar to me.
And were you getting trained or were you training the men?
I was training the men. They were absolutely green.
They had no training?
They had no training.
Were they all enlisted or drafted?
All draftees mostly, all draftees. And that's when we got, after, a little more than 30 days, that we got orders already to go overseas.
You'd only had 30 days of training them?
That's all. That's all. We didn't have, not very much training.
Do you think they were ready to go?
Well, they weren't, these troops were not combat troops. These are, the 249th was a service battalion. What service meant, as far as Army is concerned, was labor. In other words, they were to be used as labor troops, not combat troops. That's why it wasn't so essential that they had further basic training and been going overseas. So they appointed me the Advanced Task Force Officer. And I was sent on my own to Staten Island, New York, to arrange for the equipment of my unit to be available to go with the unit when we went overseas, fully equipped. That meant vehicles and arms for the men as well, and whatever was necessary for the support of the unit.
At that point, did you know where you were going to be going overseas?
Absolutely not. Had absolutely no knowledge where we were going.
So you knew you were going overseas to be in support of some fighting unit?
Well, we didn't know we could have been sent to England, as a matter of fact, or Africa. We didn't know where we were going to be sent.
So after you set things up in Staten Island, New York, did you go back to Atterbury?
No, I just waited for my unit to join me in Staten Island.
And did you ship out from New York?
We shipped out of Staten Island from there and got onto a ship, and we went to North Africa.
When did you find out you were going to North Africa?
Oh, after we were on board,
On the way over?
on the way over.
Do you remember the date?
I think it was in May. I think it was May of 43.
Where did you land in North Africa?
We landed in Oran, and that's where we're introduced to the Arabs, and we saw these Arabs dressed in entirely strange costumes that none of us ever saw before.
What did the Arabs...
And I'd just like to say at this point that for security reasons we were not allowed to write home where we were going. And I remember writing a letter that I was in one of the lands close to Abraham. They didn't know where that could be. Most anywhere where Abraham was, and that's the only way I could get by the censors.
How long did you stay in Iran?
Oh, not very long. There was like a staging area, Iran was. And they put us on trucks, and the whole unit was shipped to Algiers.
By truck?
By truck. Convoy.
And what did you do in Algiers?
Well, when we got to Algiers, my men were probably, I was separated from my unit, and they sent me as a docks officer in the port of Algiers. My men were probably doing labor tasks at various warehouses in the environs of Algiers. My job at the port of Algiers was to oversee the unloading of supplies for lend-lease to the French in the Algiers area. And my job was to hire, believe it or not, stevedores, Arab stevedores, not soldiers, but American soldiers, but Arab stevedores that worked for a stevedore company at the port. And when a ship came into port with supplies, with lend-lease supplies, I was to assign X number of stevedores for unloading the cargo of these ships. And I used some of my men to ride shotgun on these trucks with supplies going to warehouses in Algiers and surrounding areas, because they had to guard the contents of the truck because of the pilferage by the natives.
Now, where were the ships coming from?
From the States.
Oh, from the United States?
Right.
Getting supplies over to Algiers?
Exactly.
And then you were getting the supplies to
Exactly.
the warehouses?
Exactly.
And that was to supply the American soldiers?
Right. No, supplied to the French.
Oh.
Mostly for the Free French, they're called.
Oh.
And I was given permission to live in Algiers on my own in so-called residence hotels. I stayed in one in the city of Algiers with another officer in Algiers. I did not was not with the troops at the time.
How long were you in Algiers?
Oh, for several months.
Now, during that period, did you see your men on a regular basis, or were you
No.
always at the docks and they were in the warehouse?
Exactly. I was at the dock. I had no contact, close contact with my company.
What was life like living in Algiers?
Well, not too bad. I got acquainted with some of the local people and invited to dinner sometimes. And well, that's about it. They were able to drive around the countryside a little bit. I had the services of a Jeep in my possession, so that I was able to do that. And so it wasn't bad at all.
And where did you go from Algiers?
From there, I rejoined the company and drove by train, believe it or not, by train to Bizerti.
And what did you do there?
And there we bivouacked outside of Bizerti, awaiting the invasion. We did not know, but it was Sicily.
Did you know something was up?
We knew that I knew something was up because at the same time that I was down in the port of Algiers, I was combat loading ships for a possible invasion somewhere. And I happened to be combat loading the ship that General Patton was on, who was commanding the whole expedition.
Did you actually see General Patton?
I did see General Patton
Down in Algiers?
in Algiers, down in the dock area.
And what ship were you loading for him?
Loading the ship was called a Monrovia.
That must have been quite an experience.
Well, it's the first time combat loading is a little different because you load the supplies according to the way you would like the supplies to be unloaded. Certain classes of supply had priority.
So what kinds of things would they want unloaded first?
Tanks and weapons, artillery, jeeps, trucks, ammunition. Those are the things that would have priority. After that would come food and clothing. So that's the way it went in. First food and clothing, then the others with the top deck loaded with tanks and weapons and vehicles.
So Bizerti, how long were you there before the invasion?
Oh, not very long, maybe a week or 2 weeks at the most for the
And they
invasion.
loaded you on ships?
They loaded us onto what they called an LST, which was short for Landing Ship Tank. And we finally learned where we were going at that time. We landed in Sicily at two ports. No, it wasn't a port. The landing was at Gela and Licata.
Gela, how do you spell that?
Gela. And Licata, Licata.
That's one
One
word?
One word, Licata.
And that's where you disembarked?
That's where we disembarked.
And then what did you do?
And they had me forming a convoy because I did not land there D-Day. I was there several days. We arrived several days after D-Day. They had me form a convoy to go to Palermo. And so, forming the convoy, I took the convoy to Palermo at night under blackout conditions. I'd never been there before, so I just had to be very careful I didn't lead the convoy astray, because I was in the lead truck.
Oh, good heavens, 'cause that's quite a responsibility in a country you've never even been in before?
Exactly. Of course, the Army stationed personnel at various points to make sure you stayed on the road.
Did you make it to Palermo?
We made it to Palermo.
No incidents on the way?
No incidents. No incidents. And we arrived in Palermo, and we were set up in an area, a bivouac area, in Palermo.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, Palermo, we stayed a little while, but I didn't stay there in Palermo. I did stay sometime, but mostly I was sent with my platoon up the coast. I forgot the name of the town on the coast on the way that we set up a Class 3 supply point, which is gasoline and petroleum. The gasoline supply point was occupied by my platoon, and we dispensed gasoline and oil to all the trucks and other vehicles like tanks or personnel carriers with gasoline in 5-gallon cans. Everything was in 5-gallon cans. They're called bidons.
Bidon?
Yeah, I think it's spelled B-E-A-D-O-N-S. 5-gallon cans, anyway.
That must have taken a long time to fill a tank with 5-gallon cans.
Well, they filled them up that way, and they carried them extra strapped to the sides of the vehicle. You know, so they had extra gasoline with them. And the units used to come and get the bidons, and they didn't fill it right there. They take it with them and fill their tanks wherever they were going. But we were supplying them with the gasoline. That was my job.
And how long did you do that?
I really can't say. I've forgotten already. Time went by, and in the meantime, the landing was made at Salerno, Italy, after Sicily.
Yeah. And how did that affect you?
Well, it affected us that we knew that we were not a part of the assault on this invasion, but we would be available for future assaults or future landings as time went by. We didn't know when or where, but this time it wasn't our responsibility for the assault on Salerno. And so after the landings, we left Sicily by convoy up the coast again, further on to Messina.
What were your duties at Messina?
We did not stay at Messina. We crossed the straits on barges and arrived in Reggio, which was part of Calabria. And we proceeded again by convoy up the boot, so to speak. And we approach the Naples area.
Did you stay in Naples?
We did not stay in Naples, but we stayed in near Caserta. Caserta happens to be the residence of the king of Italy, and there was a castle there as well.
What did you do in Caserta?
Waiting for an assignment. And from there, we moved across the Volturno, where they had been fighting, and went further up, and we arrived at a place called Venafro. And my men were assigned to various supply points along the way. I was not able to be with them because they were scattered.
So in your whole trip up through Italy, as you went, they were assigning your men to different places on
Yes,
the way?
yes. But when I got to Venafro, which was the furthest point north, which was opposite Cassino, I remember being in the vicinity of a long-range artillery unit. They're called 155 millimeter long toms, and they used to fire especially when we were trying to sleep at night. But we didn't stay there too long because the front was stabilized, and they were looking for means of trying to break the stalemate. And so they sent us back to the Naples area, and we were preparing for an amphibious landing. We knew that that was going to be up the coast. So we stayed there for a few days. Might have been a week or 10 days, for a matter of fact. But in the meantime, we were practicing. It was the first time that our men was really concerned about security, and they gave us some 50 caliber machine guns, and we practiced firing them out off the coast. How to handle a weapon like the 50 caliber machine gun.
Now, how many men were left in your platoon if you had been losing them along?
Well, I might say they were recalled back to the unit, and the unit was reformed again.
So you were back up to all the same
Yes.
guys you started
Yes,
with?
exactly.
And did that amphibious landing take place?
That amphibious landing took place on January the 22nd of 44. And we had been loaded onto another LSD, which had been converted to a baby baby, what are they called? A landing ship. They had a deck.
A Higgins boat?
No, it was a Higgins. It was a Higgins boat, but they put a deck onto it where that small airplanes could take off from there. Flat top, that's the word. A baby flat top.
So you were all on that?
All on that, and we had some of these Piper Cubs, which were artillery spotters for the artillery. And when we arrived at Anzio for the landing, these Piper Cubs took off and used to spot targets for the artillery, and they could not land back on the on the boat, but had to land on an airfield which had just been taken by our forces. And we landed as quartermaster troops. We landed D-Day at Anzio, and we sustained a few casualties, some because we landed close to the shore, and some of them got drowned, and somebody got hit by shrapnel from artillery and so forth. So we landed at Nettuno, which is adjacent to Anzio. And at that point, I took command of my platoon and tried to find a place where we could set up a headquarters of some sort. And we drove to Anzio, and we found an abandoned artillery barracks, and we set up our headquarters there. But it turned out that that was not a fortunate place to be, because we were being constantly shelled and bombed by the enemy at that point. And so we decided to get underground as much as possible, and we found a nearby farm with a wine cellar where we stayed underneath quite a bit of, we got a bit of protection because it was underground.
Now this was probably the first combat that your troops had seen?
Exactly.
How did they react?
Well, they used to try to write letters back home, and I was the company censor for the mail, and they used to say, I was under constant fire, and I was being shelled and bombed. And that's the one thing we're not supposed to do, is to disclose military activity in writing letters. And I had to strike it all out in their letters back home. So a good many of them wanted to show that they were really part of the action. But actually, they were, because they were under constant fire, like everybody else.
Well, was this your first combat also?
Yes, it was. And
That
then
must have been
subsequently, subsequently, we had to prepare a defensive perimeter because we had been warned that we might be subject to attack by airborne infantry of the enemy. They might attack us that way. And so we had to set up a defensive perimeter for our unit. And that's where we used our 50 caliber machine guns. But fortunately, it never happened. But my men were under a lot of fire. But I was detached from the unit at that point and transferred to what they call a railhead company. A railhead company's task was to set up and to operate supply points. And I was attached to this railhead company, the Class 1 or food supply point for Anzio. And my job was to go out to the, we called them ration dumps, where the food came in from the amphibious boats that we had coming into Anzio, and bringing in all the food and supplies for the campaign. And it wasn't exactly an easy task, because I had my men also working at the supply, unloading these vehicles that brought the supplies in. And I was the white officer with all these blacks, but it didn't make any difference. They were men, so they were soldiers just like everybody else. And the only other black personnel that were in an officer capacity was a chaplain that we had.
Do you remember his name?
No, I don't remember his name, unfortunately.
How did the black soldiers feel having a white officer? You were the only white man there?
That is, the officers were all white. And they took it naturally without any fuss or or any kind of objection. They just accepted it. That's the way it was in the Army, and that's it. And the officers did the same as well.
Where did you go from there? How long were you there?
Well, I was a second lieutenant at that time.
Oh, when did you get promoted?
I got promoted, let's see, not at NZO, no. I was still a second lieutenant, and there was a policy at that time in the theater, as we called it, the area, that one could be rotated back to the States if he had served overseas for a year. And they had two rosters, for enlisted men and for officers. And I became the appointee, so to speak, for the one to go from the officers on rotation back to the States. So while we were at Anzio, I was selected to go back to the States on rotation.
Does that
Because
mean you go back home for good or just for a while?
No,
and come back?
just to rotate back to the States, not out of the service. That was just from overseas back to the States, that's all.
So did you get to go then?
I did get to go. And I was sent to, by way of Naples. I was not going to take a ship to Casablanca because of the submarine menace in the Mediterranean, and I flew to Casablanca. At Casablanca, I was supposed to wait for surface transportation back to the States. This is all on my own because I was on rotation, under orders. But no ships seemed to be coming into Casablanca, so they're going back to the States. So they said, we'll issue orders for you to fly. They sent me up to a place called Port Lyote, which is on the northwestern coast of Africa, near the Tangier and the Straits. And so they put me on a plane there for the States by way of Africa and South America. I went to Dakar by plane, and from there across the Atlantic to Belém, Brazil. Belém, Brazil was actually was at the mouth of the Amazon, or where the jungle started. And I was dumped, that's the word, for someone who had higher priority. And I could not go any further on the plane because somebody took my place. Well, at that point, I was a little bit irate because I says, these people here that are stopping people who have had combat experience like I was in the combat zone. I says, we deserve a little better treatment from anybody who's just recalled these people on the ice cream front. And so they said they'll expedite my going back. And they did get me out within a couple of days. And I flew to Puerto Rico, and from there to Miami. And there I trained. I went back to Camp Devens to be reassigned. I went back from there to Camp Lee. And at that point, having had combat or so-called overseas experience, they asked me if I would like to teach. I said, why? I said, I never was a teacher. He said, well, you were a salesman, weren't you? I said, I certainly was. He said, well, a salesman makes the best teacher. So they, after taking a course in teaching, they assigned me to the quartermaster school at Camp Lee, Virginia. and I was assigned to the Quartermaster Operations Division. There I was to teach the operations of the Quartermaster Corps to classes, non-commissioned officers, and officers. And that's where I spent my time for the balance of the war. I taught officer classes, mostly, and lived nearby, off base, and then taught at the quartermaster school.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Well, in a way, yes, for the landing at Anzio, and other just medals for the theater, but no medals. Thank goodness I was not wounded, not combat wounded, and the commendations. We did not receive any commendations, so that's about the only medals I received that I can say that was out of the ordinary.
I'm going to ask you some questions about the living conditions in life.
Yeah.
How did you stay in touch with your family? Did you?
I did. When I was in the States, whenever I got a furlough, I flew home.
When you were overseas, did you stay in touch?
Yes, by mail. Yes, I was. Like I said, I was the company censor.
Did that mean you censored your own letters? Did anyone censor yours?
No.
You just knew what not to write.
Exactly. As an officer, you're expected to do the right thing.
What was the food like?
Well, food was.
You were on the go for a lot of that time. You
I
weren't
know.
in any one place for that long. What did you do for food?
Well, most of the time we had what they called sea rations. Well, that was partially canned, mostly canned foods, and very little fresh. We used dehydrated eggs, and did not use any local food.
So probably most of the times that you were overseas when you were moving, it was sea rations?
Yeah, and then there were times when we didn't have sea rations. We had what they call K rations. It was like a big chocolate bar. When we were traveling.
Were you ever in places overseas where there was actually a mess hall?
No, I didn't have any access to a mess hall. Only company a mess hall. That is a company mess hall, yes, but not for a whole big unit. A company mess hall, yes.
What about sleeping? Where did you sleep?
Well, I was lucky. Mostly, I was able to sleep on a cot, except when I was enlisted man, I slept like the rest of the privates on the ground. Pup tents. We slept
So
at
even when you
maneuvers.
were on a cot and you were in the field and moving to all those places, were you in tents?
Oh yes, mostly tents. Yes.
And were your men in tents also?
Yes.
But they didn't get cots, they got the ground?
That's right, because officer status.
One of the perks for being an officer,
Yeah,
you get a real cot.
I had my own bought my own sleeping bag. So I used my own sleeping bag, which was part of my bedroll.
Did you have sufficient supplies?
Supplies were sufficient, yes.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Certain times, yes, especially on Anzio.
What was the most stressful part about being an officer?
Well, I wanted to see that my men that I was assigned got the best breaks they possibly could get. In other words, the accommodations or the food and would be the best that they could possibly get. I was concerned about their welfare.
How many men did you lose in combat? Did you lose all the men that you lost in combat on Anzio?
No, I didn't lose it. Most of them came through. Some of them did get wounded and were killed on Anzio because of the nature of the conditions there. We were under constant shell fire and air attacks as well. We had quite a few air attacks. Almost every night they had air attacks and shelled by day, and even the Germans fired their biggest guns at us, 240 millimeter cannon and artillery, the railroad guns that they used, that they would fire from tunnels. They would make sure that they, after firing, these guns were put back into tunnels to protect them.
Do you recall how many men you lost from your platoon?
I really couldn't say, because some of them were that I lost. I didn't have accurate count.
As the officer, are you the one that was responsible for sending that information home?
No, that was not.
Higher up?
Yeah, that was not my responsibility.
Was there anything special that you did for good luck?
Good luck?
Like rabbit foot, a lot of guys have different things that they do for good luck.
No, I did not have anything like that. I didn't. I had some close escapes from being hit by artillery, and in that respect I was lucky several times. One time I was at Anzio forming a convoy going back, and I got caught in an air raid, and I was with another officer, and we were at the port near a building, and the officer during this raid, he dived in one side of the building, and I dived into the building on the other side, and after the raid he got killed and I came out alive. Another experience, I was out at a ration dump, an artillery shell landed maybe 100 feet away, and instead of exploding on contact, it dug a hole in the ground, and I was showered with dirt and debris. So that
that must have been pretty scary.
Oh, that was pretty scary. That was pretty scary.
That was at Anzio too?
That was at Anzio, yeah.
Did you have any kind of entertainment or recreation?
While I was overseas?
Yeah.
I think, where was it? In North Africa, I think, and in Sicily. We had some of the big names. Al Jolson.
Was this at a USO show?
Oh, no, this is out in the field. Out in the field.
They came out to you?
Oh, yeah, they came out to Al Jolson, and what's her name? There were a couple of others besides Al Jolson. Oh, Bob Hope. Bob Hope was out there.
So you got to see Bob Hope?
Yeah. And that's about it, yeah.
Did you have any R&R while you were overseas?
Yes, I did. From Anzio, can you imagine? I was sent back for R&R, and where did I go? Into the Naples area. I went to Sorrento and the Isle of Capri.
How long did you have R&R?
Oh, that was only for 2 or 3 days.
So what did you do on the Isle of Capri?
Isle of Capri, I went in a little boat there was in the water in a cave, and that was the recreation. They're just riding in a little boat in a cave. That's all. There was another time I did go while I was in Naples. I went to Pompeii. You know the ruins of Pompeii. I saw that pretty well. That was another time while we were in in the Naples area.
Do you have any photographs?
War photographs? I have a few of them. Some of them they're just. You want to see one?
Not yet. When I turn the tape off.
All right. Okay.
If we can make copies, we'll attach them to this record.
All right.
What did you think of your fellow officers, and what did you think of the soldiers?
Well, as far as the officers was concerned, I thought they did well, but not exceptionally well, as far as the officers were concerned. As far as the men were concerned, I think they tried to do the right thing and do their job that they were assigned as best they could.
Did you become friends or close with any of the officers or the men?
Not really. I didn't, because I did not maintain any friendship after I left the service.
Did you stay in touch with any officers or men the whole time you were in the war? Did you always have the same group of men that you were trained with back in the United States through the whole time until you rotated back home?
Well, no. While I was in the National Guard, the infantry, that was one before I became an officer and after I received my commission. With the infantry, that was with originally with the National Guard, that was federalized. They were mostly the locals. I know some of the locals here.
Did you happen to run into any of them when you were overseas?
Not really. They went to the Pacific. 43rd Division went to the Pacific, and I went to the Mediterranean. So I didn't see them at all. But I did meet a couple of people when I was in Sicily, local people, not part of any units, but just happened to be local people that I knew.
From New Britain?
From New Britain, yes. Just by chance.
Did you keep a diary?
Excuse me. I did meet my cousin by design.
Where?
In Sicily. I had seen him before I had gone overseas. While I was in OCS, he had been inducted, and he was in a nearby camp in Virginia, and I saw him. Then after, when I went overseas in Sicily, I found out that he was in the 45th Division, which went to Sicily, and I found out about the unit he was in, and we got together one time in Sicily, my cousin.
Did you keep a journal or a diary?
No.
Did you stay in touch with any of the men or any officers after you left Sicily?
No.
Italy?
No.
How about after the war?
No.
So you finished your service out in the United States teaching the quartermaster corps.
Yes.
Do you recall your last day in service?
Oh gosh, it was in September. I'd say maybe about the 15th or so.
So we're in September. Are we in 1945? And you were discharged from Camp Lee?
No, discharged to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. I had to go to Indiantown Gap to be...
Indiantown?
Indiantown Gap. That's an army post. In fact, I hadn't, by that time I'd already gotten a car. My wife and I were living in Petersburg, Virginia, and I drove to Indiantown Gap, stayed there a couple of days, got my discharge, and came back, picked up my wife, and drove back to Connecticut.
That was my next question. What did you do in the days and weeks immediately after your discharge? So you drove back to New Britain, Connecticut?
Yes.
Did you have a place to stay or live at that time?
And when I got here,
Yeah.
my wife's residence, she lived in Middletown.
And what did you do for work after?
Well, I was in business with my brother and father, and family business.
And you had been doing that before the war?
Yes, and I went back to it.
What business was
Wholesale, grocery, food distribution.
that? And is that what you did for a career?
Yes, that's
For how
it.
many years?
Oh, 45 to about 68. And we dissolved the business at that time. We went out of business. And I retired when I was about 70, but I went into my own business after our business was dissolved here. We closed the business, and I sold cigarettes from my car. I had accounts I used to call on. It was just a business, that's all. And I did that for about 5 years, and then I retired completely.
Have you attended any reunions since the war?
Not really, no, because I wasn't part of my 249th Quartermaster Battalion was a part of the 5th Army in Italy, and in Sicily it was the 7th Army, but we had no reunions.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes, I did. I joined the JWV, the American Legion.
Do you remember when you joined? Did you join right after the war?
No.
Or not till years later?
Years later.
Are you currently a member?
Yes, I am.
What post?
Well, the JWE was post 56. American Legion, I don't know what the New Britain chapter
Where's
is.
New Britain?
Yeah.
Are you active in those organizations?
No, I'm not.
Neither one of them. Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, it has.
How?
Well, I appreciate what the military does, and I think that we have to do everything we possibly can to avoid war, because I know what war is. I know what it's like. And if there's any possible way we can achieve our objectives without resorting to war, that has to be pursued. I know that's very simple to say. Everybody is against it. But I think that's essential. That's my opinion.
How did your military service affect your life?
Well, I try to make it as little as possible to affect me, and as little as possible. I didn't want to be regimented like I was, and I wanted to be free to do whatever I wanted to do, and that's subject to any kind of